I am not a huge planning advocate because there are things that I plan for because I've got a lot of experience in them. But when I'm testing a new area, I don't actually try to plan. I try to fail. When there is something new that I'm interested in doing that I don't have any context for, my goal is to not plan and figure out how to do it right. My goal is to start setting up a place and a space where I can start failing at it regularly to start building the skills I need so I can figure out how to do it right.
Hello and welcome back to the Upflip podcast. I'm your host, Alex Freeman, and today I'm talking to Craig Swanson, founder of CreativeLive and owner of the online fitness company JustMove.com. Along with growing his own businesses, he helps other online content creators scale to new heights. Today, he's sharing his insights on how to grow a business from your first 100 customers to 100,000 and beyond. Craig, thanks for joining us.
Alex, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Let's start with your story. When and why did you start your first business, and how did that ultimately lead you to where you are today?
I've been drawn to business really from my very early days. So my first legitimate business with a business license was when I was 12 years old. I had a pretty large newspaper route and I got a wholesaler license with a business license and built a handmade ice cream cart and pulled it from my bicycle on my paper route to add additional products and printed up business cards for myself and carried business cards that were all handmade and I would hand out. I said Craig Swanson ice cream. I don't know what it said, but for me, I played around business as a kid. And I think that's what I'm doing as an adult, is playing with business as an adult.
I love that. I was also a paper boy, and I never once thought of that as an additional revenue stream. That's incredible. Well done. Talk to me about the current venture. When did you get started here, and what motivated you to start playing in this space?
My current venture is kind of broadly encompassed by what I've been doing since 2010. I basically am creating companies generally in partnerships that sell and create digital goods and host digital courses and digital communities. So really since 2010, I have launched about 10 different companies. Some of them fly, some of them go big, some of them don't. But in terms of what motivated me to do this, I started my first business when I was 18, my first legitimate business out of high school, which was an IT company. And I spent 25 years just selling my time and the time of my employees. And really, it wasn't until I made kind of a philosophical break with selling my time that I started to build the skills around what it took to do what I do now, which is basically create things that we then sell. So we're not trading time, we're creating the products of our time. We're selling the products of our time.
As someone who has launched and helped launch so many businesses in the past decade or so, what is the most challenging part of starting a business?
There's a lot of things that are challenging. There's a lot of interpersonal stuff that happens about me being willing to go out and put something out there to figure it out. But kind of on the most fundamental level, a business needs to do two things. And a business has to create value, and then it has to capture a portion of that value for itself to be able to keep going. And for me, the most challenging part of starting a business is figuring out where we can create value and who we can serve and what that feels like and whether it meshes with what I want to do. I guess technically anybody could start a business because you can form an EIN with the IRS pretty easily just online, and I can create a license with the state. But if I want to have a business, I need to have customers. And if I'm going to have customers, I have to figure out where I can create value. And ultimately, that's the hardest thing, is figuring out where can I create value.
So, what it sounds like to me, based on that answer, maybe the answer to this next question is implied, but does the niche of the business adjust the challenge, or is it all ultimately that what is my value proposition challenge?
Obviously, everything is a different challenge. Everything is a different challenge. And so generally where I've spent most of my life is in the 20% range. So most of the things that I've embarked on, I am building on something that I know about 80% of the answers to and 20% I don't. And if I do that consistently enough, and I've done that now for about 30 years, I end up covering a lot of ground. But I will say, I am not an entrepreneur that is trying to do a moonshot business. I'm not trying to do the impossible. I am trying to build businesses that serve specific communities and have a really good likelihood of success or failure in their first year, to be able to come to a point of knowing whether this is something that's going to fly or whether it's something I need to let go of relatively early on in the process.
So somebody skilled in kind of recognizing, does this business ultimately have legs? What would you say is one mistake that first-time entrepreneurs are making that is preventing them from growing their revenue into something that is a long-term sustainable business?
I do a lot of coaching with business owners in kind of the early stages. And I would say one of the biggest issues that I see is that so many first-time entrepreneurs are so married to their vision of what they want that they are not listening to the market. Ultimately, the biggest mistake is to spend all your time building something that nobody wants.
So I guess that kind of begs the question of how do you start to determine that you are building something that somebody wants?
The first thing is, can I help one person? Like, where can I create value? I mean, I'm not trying to be evasive, but when I am starting or I'm working with someone who's starting, if we are spending all of our time talking about the possibility of what they could build and none of it taking it to market and actually having a conversation with people and finding out whether people would actually like hire them or even accept their services for free. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs that do like hypothetical business building. They are so afraid of having their beliefs tested in the market that they keep it private, that they only want to show it in its perfect nature. I tend to believe that if there is a market opportunity, I should be able to take an ill-formed offering into that market with a promise to help something, because there should be so much opportunity there that my bad job at describing it should be overwhelmed by the market's need for someone to help, and they will teach me how to help them.
I love that a lot. So let's say that somebody has the even poorly formed idea of something that has the core of a good business. And as they start to build out the business, what systems do they need to put in place from the start if they want to quickly grow the company into something they can potentially live off of?
So if we are just starting out, because actually I do this a lot. So if I'm just starting out, what is the skill that I would most want to have if I were starting from scratch? The skill I'd most want to have when I'm starting from scratch is sales skills, is the ability to have a conversation with someone with a problem and to be able to determine if there is a way that I can serve that problem, if there's a solution that will fit for them. So if I were a budding entrepreneur, if I were looking at trying to set myself up, and I've never had any sales role at all, I would go sell something. I'd go volunteer for a nonprofit. I would go work in an environment. I'd take a job selling things, because I'll tell you what, there is no skill that has served me more than my ability to walk into a room with someone in need and help navigate that conversation to figure out what's happening here and if there's a way that we can help them.
That's really powerful. You also have a 3-stage approach to growing an online business. I'd love to have you share with our listeners briefly what that is and how each stage of that process works.
Give you a little bit of context for this, just to understand how I approach business, because I actually work as an investor and an incubator. And basically I come in and help people build businesses where I am an active partner in that. So this is a process I use to both evaluate the opportunity, help prove out there's an opportunity. And the conversation I always have is what I'm trying to validate is, besides me and the person I'm talking to, who are both really excited about this business we're talking about, is there anyone else that will be excited about this? Are we the only people that find this of value? And so I have a 3-step process that I tend to go through, which is the first step is just literally just proof of concept. For me, I try to invest less than $10,000 and 6 weeks of time. That $10,000 is a little bit of a luxury because I've got some support around me. But the idea is from the beginning to the time that we actually are making an offer in the marketplace to our first people that can push a buy button, I want no more than 6 weeks to go by. And I want to invest a very small amount of money. And what we're really looking for in that stage is, can we find interest and desire in other people other than us that are inside the business that believe in it? And then if we can validate that and get to the next step is what I call the incubator stage, which is basically we're trying to build up this business. And for me, the incubator stage is in this rough range between like $100,000 to $250,000, somewhere in there. And in that phase, the first phase, we were just looking to see if anyone showed any interest. Didn't care if we were profitable, didn't care if we made money. We were just basically seeing if there's interest. The second stage is we're really looking to see if we can acquire new customers in a profitable manner, if we can bring in new customers and not be running an unprofitable business in the process. So narrowing in on just kind of a couple things we're offering, trying to clarify what the message is. We're really looking for what is that. And for me, that process stays in play until we break about $1 million in sales. And then once we break about $1 million in sales, then for me, that is the growth stage. That is the scaling stage. And for me, the march from $1 million in annual sales to 10 million or better, it's all about scaling that core offering and being as effective as possible and mastering the marketing, targeting, messaging, branding, and basically building out a team to be able to run this company.
Quick reminder to our listeners that if you want to hear more real-world insights on how to grow a business, make sure to check out our YouTube channel to hear advice from entrepreneurs in a variety of industries. And if you like what you heard on this podcast, help us grow our audience and keep providing quality, informative business content by leaving a review wherever you're listening to the show. Craig, I want to talk a little bit about one thing you just said, which is that you look for businesses that you can come in as an investor and as a partner. And you also started CreativeLive with a co-founder. Can you talk about the differences between starting a business as kind of a solo entrepreneur versus starting one with a partner or bringing in a partner early?
I started my first company. I was 18, an IT company that I eventually grew to, I think we had about 6 or 7 employees that I eventually sold in 2010. That was a sole proprietor. That was me. And I never even really considered myself an entrepreneur as much as I consider myself a small business owner. And I struggled to get myself out of that business. I kept saying that I wanted to have something bigger than me, but I kept acting against that and making sure that other people were not necessarily able to have more control or power than me, that I built systems that only relied on me. Since 2010, every business I have started, I have been a partner. I have been a 50% partner or less. And so every business that I have built, I have come in really with the philosophy and the mindset that I'm building something that is going to work without me becoming a necessary cog in the system. And I'm really focusing on building a company entity that is living and breathing and working, where the company has the support structure to work as opposed to me being the person that's doing the work in the business. And so just in terms of like a mindset, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that do not like partnerships. They want to be in complete control. And I found my sweet spot. I know the type of person I partner well with, and we need to have different types of skills. I need to bring something that is really unique that they are absolutely missing. And they need to bring something that's unique that I'm absolutely missing. And when that works and we have good communication and we have trust, the results are so much greater than what I've been able to do individually.
Not to bring the mood down here, but we've talked a lot about successes so far, and obviously so much of your experience is built on success, but I'm sure there's been some failure in there as well. What has been your biggest failure as a business owner? How'd you recover, and what did you learn?
So this is actually pretty topical. I asked my wife about this, and I trust her a lot. And she said, wanting to do it all yourself, failing to share the responsibilities. So ironically, what felt like my biggest failure at the moment that it was occurring was when I was losing control over CreativeLive. You mentioned that CreativeLive was the first business I started as a partnership. And not only did we start as a partnership, but about a year and a half in, we brought in a CEO to take the reins and help us grow to the next level. And in that process, and then also in the process of taking in investors and growing, it felt like something I loved was being unwillingly ripped away from my control. And I would not have willingly gone through that process if I had not kind of like got myself trapped into it. And if I hadn't gone through that process, which felt like the biggest failure I had ever experienced in business, I would really have never discovered for myself what was possible on the other side. And I probably would have remained blind to what I consider now some of my greatest strengths. So even kind of rephrasing that concept, what felt like the biggest failure is actually the birthing process that brought me to be the entrepreneur I am today. And I kind of look back at the 25 years of running CreativeTechs, my first IT company, and I wouldn't trade that. But if I looked back, the failure of opportunity for me there of just how small I kept my game so that I was never threatened in my control, that would be the ultimate failure if I had not gone through the painful process of learning what the options are.
You'd mentioned your ability in sales and your skills in sales as being one of the key skills that you felt that you have and that you feel that others should have and develop. Are there other key skills that an entrepreneur should go develop to make sure they can grow their business?
I'm a member of a entrepreneurs group, business owners that all run businesses more than $1 million a year. And I am a coach inside of a accelerator program for business owners that are doing over 250,000 that have not yet broken $1 million. So I'm in these intimate groups on kind of both sides of that fence. And the way that business owners talk on both sides of that fence is completely different. When I am in my group where all of the business owners are running well over $1 million companies, we are all talking about how we are dealing with problems through the lens of people and systems and what type of team we need. And very few times do I see people talking about what they need to do to solve a big, nasty problem. It's more about they're talking about how they are going to marshal the team or organize the team or deal with the issues around the team to be able to deal with whatever issues they're dealing with. And in businesses that are in the 250,000 to $1 million range, they're in that kind of like struggling range, I find that entrepreneurs are really struggling to figure out their own power dynamic with team. Like they're trying to figure out how can they trust somebody? How can they trust somebody to give them control? How can they empower people? How can they control people after they've empowered them? Like there's this dynamic of trying to keep control or figure out how they work with people that they haven't figured out yet. And that is like the biggest difference between entrepreneurs that are running relatively small business who want to grow big is basically figuring out their relationship with how they lead other people and how they can build with other people carrying a lot of the load. And I will also say, until we are ready to be good leaders, we attract people that are attracted to bad leaders. We attract people that are attracted to the chaos. And so we don't even get to necessarily work with the type of people that we want to work with because we haven't figured out how to be the people that can lead that type of group.
Wow, that is incredible insight there as well. I had never really considered until we're ready to be leaders, we're not going to attract the kind of people that we would want to be leading. That's so powerful.
Absolutely. There's some extraordinary people that just are joining our team in the last 2 years. And looking at those people, there is no way that those people would ever work with me back when I was running my little IT company, not based on the size of the company, not based on the clients, not based on the mission, just based on me as a leader. They would not have signed up for me. I would have been terrified of having made the commitment it would take to get those quality people.
I want to kind of talk about the early days of a business and someone getting prepped to start a business, and to kind of just like kickstart the conversation. If somebody's listening to this and says, oh, I would love to start an online content business of some kind, what are kind of the necessary startup expenses that they should be planning for? How much money do they need realistically to make sure they can be successful?
I mean, honestly, the answer is nothing. Let's just start with this. Today, I honestly believe that what you need if you're going to start an online content business is you just need to start figuring out how to get an audience. And to get an audience, unless you're going to buy an audience with advertising or something else, you don't really need any money to get an audience. What you need to have is something of value or something interesting to say. And then in terms of how you say it, we can talk into the microphone on our iPhone. We can record in front of just the built-in camera on our iMac to start getting an audience. I partner with people that have really large audiences, and inevitably they started with nothing. Actually, I'll use myself as an example. So CreativeLive. CreativeLive started as a company I incubated inside of my IT company. And I was the first instructor. Wow. And I had a $25 Plantronic headset and my existing computer. And I think I was using the webcam. Maybe we didn't have webcams then. I don't actually know what I used for a camera, but we didn't invest in anything to make it happen because I had the basics of communication with the computer. What I needed to do was figure out how to have a conversation with people and give something of value. And even before that, the people that came to those early classes I was teaching, this is back in 2008, had signed up for an email newsletter that I had started writing probably about 6 years earlier with tips and tricks. And what did it cost to start that newsletter? A $35 a month subscription to MailChimp or whatever I was using at the time. Maybe it was Constant Contact. And me setting aside about 6 hours a week to work on the content. So from a financial standpoint, I don't think you need anything except for maybe the ability to buy back a day to a day and a half of your time on a consistent basis to invest into your future.
And then what kind of planning, research, or prep should they be doing before they get their business started? And how does it help them to make sure that they hit the ground running?
I am not a huge planning advocate because there are things that I plan for because I've got a lot of experience in them. But when I'm testing a new area, I don't actually try to plan. I try to fail. When there is something new that I'm interested in doing that I don't have any context for, my goal is to not plan and figure out how to do it right. My goal is to start setting up a place and a space where I can start failing at it regularly to start building the skills I need so I can figure out how to do it right. So maybe a little bit of research, but ultimately we're talking about a content-based company. So a content-based company, if I'm the content creator, so I'm going to be either writing or I'm going to be speaking, I'm going to be videoing, I'm going to be doing something. It is going to be me figuring out whatever my path for communication is and me testing it a couple different ways until I figure out what works for me for something that I can do reliably for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time while I'm building the audience, and then start figuring out what it takes to get people to be attracted and listen.
Are there ways that somebody could identify a target market and niche for a new business that they could be just kind of like going through regularly? Or is it more about, in some ways, following your interests and saying, okay, yeah, this is something that I can devote this to and I can see a need within it?
There are ways. So there are professionals. I'm probably one of those that at this stage in my career will do an analytical view of a market and figure out where there's an opportunity and then figure out who the content creators are in that area and how we can build them out. But if we're talking about someone early in their business, let's just put it this way. If they are new to content creation and they want to create a new content thing, the first let's say the first 6 months of content that they create is going to be crap anyway. And it's really about creating the habit and the processes and them getting kind of like better at it. So I almost don't even care what they do when they're starting. A lot of the podcasts I listen to, a lot of the writers I listen to, a lot of the YouTube channels I follow and have partnered with, including Kaisa, who is my partner at Just Move. They all started with a failed social media attempt. Kaisa started with a partner creating workouts on a regular basis, and that ended up kind of shutting down unexpectedly. candidly, but it gave her the skills and the experience for her to be able to come back and more analytically look at how she was going to build the business the next time. I run into a lot of people who say they want to start a business who do not want to act until they've got it all figured out. And so they never act and they never start making the mistakes that will allow them to be good at it. So I really don't advocate for trying to get it right to start with. If you were asking me how an experienced entrepreneur would try to pick the right topic, I'd have a conversation about that. But we're talking about someone who wants to get started that isn't started. I would say start and then start seeing what works.
Earlier in the interview, you mentioned the proof of concept for a business. Can we drill into that a little bit further about what that means and when should a business owner develop the proof of concept for their business?
So let's focus on, for me, I tend to create content businesses. So you're asking, when should someone create a proof of concept? I tend to believe that I want a proof of concept for every stage of every business that I've ever started. So for me, a proof of concept is something I'm looking to do whenever I am working on a new venture. So if someone is looking at starting a business for the first time, I would tend to, in their shoes, be focused on seeing if I can get a proof of concept which is enough of a client interaction that I can basically see if this thing is going to work out. If I'm going to be a computer consultant, can I propose some work and get maybe 20 hours scope of work defined that I can go in and do and I know I can be able to achieve? If I'm creating some online stuff, can I create enough to be able to prove out the concept that this is working, or even that I can do the type of work? In my world, where I am doing proof of concept generally with people that have an existing business and they've got some momentum, they've got something. What I tend to do is I tend to try to create a structure in which within a 6-week period of time, we can take something that they are already an expert in, that they've either taught before or that they are so expert in that they can extemporaneously teach it fairly easily, that we can define enough of an audience that we can speak to, that we can make an offering to that audience, that we can create something that people who want to sign up for this knowledge can sign up for. And then we deliver it in the simplest fashion possible, be that a Zoom call that is recorded or some other fashion. There's probably about 3 different companies that I've helped do that with just in the last year. In fact, we are right now 1 week into a launch with a gym owner that is doing a course for gym owners and personal trainers. It's something he's an expert at. And it launched a week ago. We've just hit the 100, I think we're at 117 people. 117 people have purchased it at this point. And it is now, we're now in the process of moving it from proof of concept into something that now, hey, this is actually working. Let's start building out some systems. And he's a great example of someone that has been creating content and doing things for probably about 10 years, but has not pulled the trigger on this yet. So it's not like he needed to figure out how to teach this. He needed to stop trying to wait until there was a perfect opportunity and create just enough that we could fulfill what is promised and start to see if the market responded to it.
In that launch phase, how do you quickly generate that brand awareness? Or is it about having that baked in audience before you hit that launch?
For me, it is definitely about having an existing audience. So when I am partnering with people, the way I like to say it is basically the first 100 sales are really on them. If they don't have enough of a personal network, enough of a following that we can get 100 online digital goods sales, then there's probably not a business for us to build at this point. And really what they should be focusing on is audience building. Another way to look at it is if I can't get a large enough audience of people listening to what I'm an expert in for free, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get them to buy something. There are ways to cold launch. There are absolutely ways to cold launch where you become an expert at effectively online advertising, and it's all advertising based. But that's not the type of business that I tend to work with. I tend to focus on soft launches that are to existing audiences and then using what we learn with those existing audiences to build out the marketing platform that goes out and expands beyond that, where we 10x the audience, where we use that initial audience as a seed to understand. But the first 100 is really on the existing relationships.
This is going to bring us to a portion of our show we call our Fan Blitz questions. These questions come from our YouTube community. You can go to youtube.com/upflip, join the community, and pose questions to future podcast guests. Craig, we're going to try and get through about 5 questions here in approximately a minute. We'll see how we do. Here we go. Biscayne Supercars would like to know, what are some common businesses that you don't recommend?
I don't like businesses that require me to have to engage with people for everything. The only solution is a human being trading a human being's unique time and talent to solve the problem. For me, that is not something I want to work on scaling.
DL is asking, what strategies do you use to find those target customers?
I do a lot of looking where people are gathering. So groups collections, other influencers in the market. If I'm looking for particular people, I try to find where those people are going. So if I'm looking for graphic designers, I'm looking for graphic designer communities. I'm looking for workshops, places where graphic designers are gathering.
I'm Bill Gates has asked, are the businesses you're scaling in the same industry? If not, what kind of research do you do to find out what the customer pain points and selling points are?
Generally, I start businesses in different industries. I'll basically go as deep as I can in a industry, like photography, I went deep in. And then I've done some support with hairdressing, and we're now in fitness, and I've done some things in food. And in each case, I am trying to partner someone who's got a community or has a large following. And then we do a surveying process that keeps things very open-ended and ask the audience to basically kind of do some dreaming for us about what they would like. And we've got some analytical ways to be able to take a lot of open-ended statements from a large audience and kind of narrow that into a second round where we can be more specific.
Knockout Vinyl would like to know about an example of how your mind processes problems and finds a solution, and how, either in the past or currently, are you overcoming the fear of failure?
I overcome the fear of failure by defining failure as my first step in any process. So it is not something to avoid, but it's something to embrace. And I do a lot of embracing failure. And I would say in CreativeLive and in Just Move, in most of my companies, almost every big inflection point has come from a major roadblock or failure for something we had planned, where we took a moment, mourned, and then responded based on the failure. And what we responded with is actually the thing that took us to the next level. So failure for me is not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced and accepted and enjoyed to the degree that you can.
Last one here, Hyla State Service Junk Removal and Hauling would like to know, is it still enjoyable? You've been at this for a while.
It is. It is enjoyable. I do find that it takes some bigger numbers today for me to hit some of the endorphins that used to hit me in some smaller numbers, but I still wake up really excited. I will say that my excitement comes from the people I'm partnering with and seeing them go through transformative experiences, a little bit less so than me hitting those transformative experiences. I really enjoy kind of like introducing people to a new area and opportunity in life, business-wise.
That is going to do it for our Fan Blitz questions. Again, those come from our YouTube community. You can go to youtube.com/upflip, join the community, and post questions to future podcast guests. Craig, just a few more questions for me. I want to talk about this period of time going from 100 customers up to that kind of 100K customer range. How do the marketing strategies and ad platforms shift or change as you're going through that phase of growth?
First of all, first thing that matters is the first customer. When we launch something, I'm just like on pins and needles. First customer shows it's working. Second customer shows it was not a fluke. 10 customers is kind of that point where all of a sudden, okay, this may be something that's got some momentum. The 100 to 100,000 customer range, the way I look at it is the path from your first 100 customers to your first 1,000 customers is where we are doing a slow handoff from relying on your existing network to using what we're learning about those customers to create patterns and approaches and targeting options to be able to go get the next 1,000 or the next 100,000, next 10,000. So I, in a company that is going to scale, really work with my creative partners to set the expectation that the first 1,000 customers are incredibly important, but they are not financially important. The first 1,000 customers, if the first 1,000 customers are important to us in a year, then our business is not growing. So we can do almost anything with the first 1,000 customers. Pricing, refunds, almost anything we can do with the first 1,000 customers, because the first 1,000 customers are for us to learn what it takes to take this product to market and how to find that positioning. So many entrepreneurs treat their first 1,000 customers like they are this magical thing that needs to be respected above everything else. Once they make one offer to the first group of them, they can never change that offer. And then they get just locked into this very limiting belief cycle that it's a scarcity cycle where you think if the first 1,000 customers are basically defining the scope and scale of my business, and if I'm thinking, are they going to renew in a year? And that's critical to my business. It means my business isn't growing enough, fast enough that we're scaling. Because as much as I want those first 1,000 customers to be delighted, what I need from them is I need their learning. I need their momentum. I need them to teach us the words and the attitudes. And I need to use their examples as the testimonials and the social proof for the people to follow them. So they are not a financial tool. They are a learning tool. And really at every stage along the way, from 100 to 100,000, it is about learning from the people that have come earlier, building in social proof systems so that those people become the indication of success for the people to follow them. And basically about learning from their language how to really dial in. In terms of channels, I tend to focus on probably one primary channel until we get to at least above 1,000. Like, I'm not going to jump between channels until I'm above 1,000. By the time I'm at 100,000, I'm probably starting to definitely have multiple channels, email, maybe 3 different social networks. But even then, 100,000 isn't that many people if you are going to do a company that scales. So you shouldn't be widely diversifying. You should be focusing on like what works for these people.
How do you identify those potential new revenue sources to diversify, and how important is diversifying revenue streams in scaling the business?
I actually think it is a mistake until we have a company that can scale. Now, keep in mind, I am not building a lifestyle business for myself that is designed around my pleasure in running the business. I'm building businesses that ideally can take the weight off the shoulders of the owners as the company scales. And what I think a lot of small businesses do is they try to swell before they scale. They end up adding all these adjunct services before they figured out their profitability and before they figured out how to scale. So I don't want to really add on a bunch of adjunct services until I've broken $1 million. If I can break $1 million in annual revenue off one core audience, one core class of product, and maybe even one channel, one primary communication channel, I don't want to start diversifying my income until I can get something that I can scale up to that million. And then once I've got something, then I've got one thing to scale that I can take from $1 million and beyond. And at that point, I can start looking at potentially figuring out ways of really being able to exploit more opportunity within the markets we're serving or finding adjunct communities that we could support. But I think it's a huge mistake. I think so many companies at early stages are trying to diversify so wildly that they never create a space that they can scale. They just swell into like all these adjunct areas, but each one's a unique little one-off, and they can't build systems, and there's no such thing as scaling. It's just they're trying to scale by just like grabbing money left and right, and then the owner is just basically running everywhere and is just swamped and can't hire employees because like there's too many things to do.
I do want to ask about hiring employees. Where in the timing of all of this does kind of growing out the team make sense? And how do you make sure that you either A, don't hire too soon, or B, don't wait too long to start building out a team?
I tend to want to work with contractors and product or project-based team members until I have unlocked profitability around one core product. So generally for me, I am actually trying to not really hire full-time employees until we are well within that $250,000 to $1 million range, where we've figured out the product. We've got 1 or 2 things that are working in the market. We know who our audience is. And during those early times, I'm trying to learn. I do tend to be very mission driven. So I very often can get a lot of really committed contract employees. So it's not a matter of like commitment, but it's a matter of not having the business being put into a situation where we're basically committing to multi-year engagements with employees when we haven't figured the business out. Once we are ready to start scaling, and for me, that's about the time that it tips over to $1 million, give or take. That is when I am basically building out a growth team. And I start to move into a mentoring role where we're basically mentoring the leadership of the company that's going to take it to the next phase. But I do tend to want to hire a little bit slower. And I guess it's salesman skills, or it's just creating a belief. People want to work for something that matters. People want to work for a team that matters and want to be heard and feel like they're contributing. And so the trick is we've been able to get contractors that have been able to really commit to our projects because we treat them really well and they believe in what we're doing. But part of my belief in what we're doing is I'm trying to make sure the company is always protected, and I try to make sure that we are not taking on things for the company that are long-term obligations until we've figured out the profitability of the business.
What's the biggest challenge that a business is going to face as they're growing to that 100,000th customer?
Depends a lot on how much your customers are paying. So like I've sold online goods where our average customer value is maybe a couple $100s over the course of, the first couple of years. Or I've worked in deeper things that the customer value is $5,000. And so that 100,000 customer base can look drastically different depending on what the business model looks like. But I would say in general, at that stage, it is really about communication and branding and building out internal systems that can match the promise of what you're offering your customers. I tend to work in a lot of communities. And the thing about a community that is belief or mission based is if you communicate with them really cleanly and you're really honest with them and you live up to your promises, they will support you and help you grow. And so they actually become a protecting force and help us grow. But if we don't support them, if we do not live up to what we've promised, that same number of people then become detractors and it can just destroy a company. So as long as you're not looking at doing 100,000 one-off transactions where those people never talk to each other, if you're looking at building a community, I would say the most important talent and challenge at that point is figuring out how to manage the organic growth of a large community where those people are not someone you can control, but they're basically advocates that you have to finesse and lead.
What does it mean if/when a company hits a growth plateau? How do you either A, avoid that moment and or restart growth when you do hit a plateau?
That has happened to me a number of times. I'll be honest, I don't know, based on history, that I know the answer to that. There are two main reasons I have seen things plateau. One is for a membership subscription service, it's just literally your attrition. So like based on your attrition numbers and the amount it costs to acquire a new customer, so basically the cost to acquire a new customer and the length of time a customer will stay in, and then what their frequency of leaving is, you can mathematically use those numbers to basically predict your plateau, to basically say, okay, this is the point where mathematically everything kind of like stops growing based on how frequently we lose clients and what it costs to acquire a new client. And that type of situation is more tactically about focusing on why people are leaving and driving down the reasons that people are leaving, or creating more stickiness for people to stay in the community, or figuring out how to acquire new customers less expensively. That's the mechanical way of dealing with that type of plateau. The other type of plateau is more of the internal company, creative energy. It's hard to lead a growth team that is growing nonstop. And honestly, sometimes the best thing to do to like get past an internal problem where we're just like creatively tapped and we're a little bit exhausted is sabbaticals and projects that are away from the normal course of business, to try to get people to like break out of their lethargy and kind of come back and get an opportunity to see afresh what's in front of us. So either new blood or trading out. One of the things that I've played with other business owners is literally like trade creative teams for a week, let them go run some other company and growth team, and have another growth team come in and grow yours, because we end up getting so siloed in what we're doing. And especially this happens after success. Like you hit this huge level of success and then you've been doing the same things over and over again, and we need a break. People need to basically reset. And usually the next level of success comes from kind of rethinking what we've done up to this point. So one is mechanical. It's all about the clients, and it's basically about attrition, user acquisition, and churn. And the other is more internally in leadership, which is about refreshing the vision and figuring out how we can get everyone to like have their second wind and go to something new.
One thing that you've brought up a few different times is this idea of maintaining that community for the users and for the importance of the audience. Obviously, one thing that comes along with that is taking care of those people and taking care of those customers. So how do you maintain a high level of customer service as the business grows and scales?
You actually asked about employees. Customer service is almost always one of the first places I will invest in a company. So part of it is just literally making it a priority within the company. If one of our customers speaks, I want them to feel heard. And for me to have them feel heard, that means I have to communicate that it is important, and I have to put people in charge of that are good at listening and good at responding. And when I think back of all the companies I've done, like we have had extraordinary customer support teams. And it's partially because we put such a priority on it that we get to hire good people because they want to work at a company where customer service is valued, as opposed to just this cost center that nobody values. Beyond that, it's actually kind of baked into the beginning. But I'm going to jump back to when you were talking about the first 100 customers. Yeah, I didn't really think about it from this standpoint. But the one thing that I do in the first 100 to the first 1,000 buyers is we have an extraordinarily strong guarantee that we usually put into place, where we basically have a clear promise and a clear guarantee. And it's not just a marketing guarantee. You know, my customer service team is refunding money on a regular basis when people are invoking the guarantee. And that is important because the people I most want to listen to about how to adjust the quality of my service are not people who didn't buy. I mean, it's useful to know why people didn't buy, but I don't want to go be chasing people who didn't buy, because who knows, if I did everything they said there I was going to do, if I answered every concern they had, would they buy? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. But it's the people that saw something in the promise that we were offering, that saw something in the value that we were saying we provided, that put their money down, that when given a guarantee came back and said, hey, you didn't live up to this. That is what I want. And basically that is one of the biggest roles from our customer service team, is to make sure that they're bringing to our team two things. They're bringing to our team the stories from our customers that are really getting a lot about what we're doing, but also to bring the stories to us of why people that put their trust and money in our hands that we did not live up to, what didn't work about that, because those are the people that I really want to listen to more than the people who didn't buy that tell us what we should be doing.
One thing we haven't necessarily really gotten into is any specific, or even general, I guess, tools or software recommendations that you might have for somebody as they're getting ready to kind of build a business and grow a business that can help keep things automated and clean and clear in their system administration.
I mean, we're just talking about customer service, so I'll give a big shout out to Help Scout. So Help Scout is the customer service tool that we use. It is like a central email inbox. A lot of people will just create one Google account and then they'll maybe have 2 or 3 members, but they're always stepping on each other. And, you never know if you're replying twice to the same customer. Help Scout allows you to have a scaling support team where it automatically creates a one-on-one communication with your customer for whomever picks that up. So it's a way of being able to scale a support team. Zendesk is a very similar company in the same space. I prefer Help Scout because Help Scout does not feel like a system to the end user. It just feels like they're getting an email, whereas Zendesk feels a little bit more like the person who's getting support is in a customer service queue, which I prefer to have it feel more human. That's maybe a little more on the scaling side. I mean, we do a lot with Slack for team communication. I'm a huge believer in dashboards. Like I'm a huge believer in finding a dashboard that's going to work with whatever your store mechanism is, because sales and interaction with that are the heartbeat of the company. I could list off some dashboards, but honestly, they're so tied into whatever mechanism that you're selling with that I'm not sure if that'd be a useful conversation.
I want to kind of look back at CreativeLive real quick, which was acquired by Fiverr last year, and you've helped grow other businesses to sales as well. How do you know as an owner that now is the time to sell?
That has evolved for me over time. I am a partner, so I am usually the business and marketing and tactical partner with a creative visionary. And so often I will leave it in the hands of the creative visionary to determine if and when there comes a point that we're going to try to sell the company. What my job is to build the company so it can be sold. So I am from CreativeLive on. CreativeLive was the first company that I started with the purposeful intention of building it so it could be sold. That's not the same thing as saying building it to sell. It means building it so that it could be sold. And in terms of the right time when, I think there's a lot of opportunistic choices. There's life choices. In the case of both CreativeLive, but also Sue Bryce Education, which we sold during the pandemic. And it was a really good time for us. Online education had one of its best years because everyone was locked in their houses. So we were at a high point, and there were companies with a lot of money because of all the government activity of like just flushing new money into the market. It was a real buyer's opportunity for a lot of companies. So just from a mathematical standpoint, it's a really good time for us to do that. But really, I leave it largely up to the creative visionary I'm partnered with in terms of what they want for themselves.
I'm curious about the difference between building a business so that it can be sold versus if there's anything that you need to do differently once you kind of have made the decision that, okay, now we are going to prepare for a sale. Is there anything that you need to do kind of before you bring the business itself to the marketplace to kind of maximize what you may see offered?
So that's one of the things that we really learned at CreativeLive. So CreativeLive took about $50 million in funding from VCs. So in a sense, we were selling CreativeLive in little bits and stops along the way. But the CEO, remember I mentioned that we had hired a CEO about a year and a half in. He had taken a company public on the London Exchange, I believe. And he basically stepped into CreativeLive and from day one was building CreativeLive to be able to go through due diligence. Because when you sell a company, basically you go through the due diligence of having every aspect of your business being validated and investigated and proved by outside observers. And it means that if I'm building a business that I want to be able to sell, I am setting up and paying my taxes properly from the beginning. I am doing sales tax in the appropriate states where we pass Nexus because of financial sales. I am basically setting up our contracts and our legal agreements so that they are all in place. And unfortunately, most of what I know about how to set a business up correctly to be sellable is by all of the problems and all the failures we have had along the way in previous businesses that only came up during the point we were trying to sell them. There are so many things that you have to prove. And I remember in the early days of CreativeLive, I wouldn't have contracts with my instructors, or I would have like basic contracts or nothing. But none of those contracts were written with kind of the reverse viewpoint of how a potential buyer would look at those, or whether there were the agreements in those contracts that would let us transfer the rights that we had to a potential buyer, or setting up our chart of accounts and our accounting practices so that an external buyer is going to be able to validate and see that they work properly. Issues of whether we are doing an accrual basis or a cash basis came into play when we sold Sue Bryce Education to a publicly traded company and had to have all of our accounting moved over to GAAP standards. And in that process really changed what our valuation could have been because of the difference between cash basis and accrual basis. There's just a ton of things that come into play when you're selling a business. Your question was, how do you prepare? I mean, the first thing is to create a business that's worth selling, because like you could do everything right and have a business no one wants. It's to be one of the books I'm going to recommend at the end, but Building to Sell, I think, or when we get to it, but there's a book on building to sell that I think is a huge one to read. And I think also probably being in a support group of other entrepreneurs where a portion of them have been through transactions, there's a lot to learn from hearing what other entrepreneurs have been through.
Any last pieces of advice to share for business owners who want to grow to 7 figures?
Enjoy it. I would say if you're going to trade your life for something, trade it for something that is going to be worth doing when you're failing. Because speaking from experience, and even in the last couple of years, there are years that feel like we are failing at our ultimate objective, but it's still a game I want to play. And if I only got joy out of this game when I was winning, I'd be missing a lot of my life.
If you could pick the one thing that people take from this interview, what would it be? Let
the market respond. Stop playing hypothetical entrepreneurism and take something to market and let the market respond and learn from what occurs.
And now we're at the book question. What's your favorite business book and why?
All right. Number one, Built to Sell. Built to Sell, hands down, fantastic book. And then I have a follow-up for creative business owners, Rocket Fuel, which is tied to something called the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, kind of mechanism for management. For creative business owner, it talks about the difference between the visionary and the integrator. And that concept, the first 3 chapters of Rocket Fuel, can be transformative for a creative business owner that maybe has a hard time dealing with the logistics.
Craig, where can people learn more about you and the work you're currently doing?
Best place to find me is at my website, craigswanson.org, not .com.org, and on LinkedIn. I'm really active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my social media.
That is going to do it for this episode of the Upflip podcast. A reminder to our listeners, you can find more advice for how to start a business the right way on the Upflip Hub, or check the listings on our website to find a business that's already up and running and ready to start making revenue. And as always, please remember to leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast and tell a friend who might be interested. Craig, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alex. This was great.